All right.
All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Hearing Things with Julie and Brad. We are so excited to have a special guest with us today, Professor David Baldridge, and I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself, state your role, and kind of a brief introduction about you and your work.
Sure. So first, thank you so much for having me. In case I forget later, I lived in the Boston area for about a decade, so I'll try to make sure but it's been a while. But it feels at home to be with you and have you host me from Boston. So I am currently a professor of organizational behavior, which is part of management at Oregon State University. So I'm in the College of Business, and I teach MBA courses on leadership and a separate course on negotiation. And I research a lot of different things, but the workplace experiences of people who are deaf and hard of hearing is a central focus for me, and of course, an area of great passion. I also share, I have the same role at Rochester Institute of Technology, and worked for them before I got my first cochlear implant. With my first cochlear implant, it kind of opened my world back up, and I am an outdoor nut, so I love to ski and hike and things like that. So that's how I ended up in Oregon. Also a great school. I'll share too, I'm on HLAA's National Board of Directors, and previously was on the board of directors for ALDA, the Association of Late Deaf Adults. And served on ALDA's board in Boston when I lived in Boston. And in Oregon, I've also served the state commission on their board, HLAA's state board, and also a small not-for-profit called Bridges, Oregon. So a lot of experience academically as well as kind of serving people with hearing loss directly.
That's fantastic. So I got the question number 2. And I'm cheating because I have 2 questions here.
Oh no!
What is your hearing loss history, and what assisted technology have you used over the course of your hearing loss, and how has it changed?
Yeah, so that is more than a 2-part question because I was first diagnosed in 2nd grade with hearing loss, and likely it originates probably at age 2 or 3, and that's just a guess because my language development was pretty unimpacted, and I had a lot of ear infections when I was an infant. So it might have been the ear infections, it might have been the medicines used to treat the ear infections, and possibly I have a genetic predisposition towards deafness or towards an adverse reaction to the certain medications. So anyways, a lot is kind of unknown, and definitely remember, walking into that hearing booth as a little kid, and I entered normal and I left somehow different, right? I had failed this important test that I didn't know I had to take that day. But my life was not hugely impacted early on because it was mostly the high frequencies that I was missing. So it made it harder to learn to spell. My speech was impacted slightly, but kind of the way kids without hearing loss, their speech can be impacted, so S's and T's and things like that. So anyways, it definitely impacted my early childhood, but not really substantially. Then by high school, it was getting difficult to communicate with other kids in large, noisy settings, which is most of high school, right? And then by college, so I went to college at the University of Michigan, and that was where I wore my first hearing aid in my sophomore year. And, remember that seeming odd, right? Because I was young. No other kids had hearing aids at that point, right? But I also had a really amazing and normal time in college. So I was a great student. I was captain of my ski team. I had a lot of friends. I tended to hang out on the edge at parties.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have any accommodations back then other than asking other kids to borrow their notes. And in hindsight, I kind of self-accommodated. So I would try to take classes where the professor had written a book, thinking, that the lectures would be similar to the book itself. Yeah. And so that was, 4 years. Hearing loss continues to decline. I went straight into graduate school at Michigan and got my MBA there. And that was the first time that I used an FM system so I could hear the professors better. A secret self-accommodation, I realized that some of the overhead projectors were louder. And they weren't loud, but at that point, I still heard the lowest frequencies fairly normally, but had lost the higher frequencies. So the fan noise was very disproportional to me, even with the FM system. So I would come early and I would swap out the projectors for my favorite overhead projector, and was confronted once about whether I was stealing the projector or not.
Brilliant.
So anyways, hearing continued to decline over time. Technology continued to improve. So I'm trying to think, I guess the first real workplace accommodation I used was asking for a TTD or a TTY, so a teletypewriter for the deaf.
Yep.
And that was really interesting. I've written about that experience because it was really difficult to ask for the accommodation because I was asking for something special, right? Something different from my coworkers had. And I didn't know how much it would help, right? If it would help or not, cost of the organization, and kind of putting myself out there as a person with hearing loss, A, who needs an accommodation, B, and C, who knew his legal rights, right?
Exactly.
And so that experience really paved the way for a lot of my research later on. Accommodations. So from there, that was in Boston, where I first asked for that accommodation. So I worked for a company called Project Adventure. An outdoor
we have that at school.
Okay, yeah. So outdoor experiential education company, and upsides for them are that they're kind of whatever works. There are no cardinal rules or anything. So there informally, I'd use like a talking stick for communication. The TTY was more of a formal accommodation. And they were pretty flexible about what work I did and how I did it. But that was the time where I really crossed over into being what I call functionally deaf. And what I mean by that is that I couldn't use a phone at all anymore. No amount of amplification was enough. And I couldn't understand someone else speaking unless I could see them and speech read them. So that led me to think that maybe I needed a different long-term career plan. And my super naive, but fortunately it worked out, solution was to go back to school and get my PhD. And that was at the University of Connecticut.
Cool. Great.
And there for accommodations, I used CART reporters in the classroom, which if you can't hear anything, CART is amazing, right? Suddenly you can read the words. As I work the other way with my cochlear implants, I can stream via Bluetooth. I can hear so much. I can't believe I got through my PhD program using CART, right? Because it's so fast. Professors are writing on the board. A lot of it is discussion based. But anyways, that's what I had at the time. And that accommodation carried over to my first professorship, which was at Rochester Institute of Technology. So I was a professor there. I had some students with hearing loss, but they would be a small minority. Most were just, regular MBA students. and used the captioning to hear people. During that time, cochlear implant technology had improved to the point that I thought it would benefit.
Okay.
And at that time, when you got a cochlear implant, you would lose whatever residual hearing you had. So I waited till I didn't have a lot to lose, hopefully more to gain. And for people who don't know cochlear implants well, that was 23 years ago. So that's changed a lot, the ability to preserve residual hearing. So I don't scare anyone off.
Right.
And then, do you want me to talk about current accommodations a little bit too?
Thank you.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's a long answer because I've kind of lived the full spectrum of hearing loss and full range of technology. But to bring things, to the current situation, I now have bilateral cochlear implants.
Okay.
They have improved tremendously over the last 23 years, both hardware and software. So I always ask people to think about, what telephones looked like 23 years ago.
Such a good point.
So the same thing has happened, a lot of the same technology, right? So the hardware, software, microphone technology. So anyways, I hear really well now in quiet settings. You wouldn't necessarily know that I had hearing loss at all. And in situations like this, I use Bluetooth streaming. So I'm streaming this with a Roger microphone because it's easy to plug in.
Yep.
It streams my voice to folks and allows me to hear them. And I always tell people that I hear better now than I did probably all the way back to early childhood with the clarity of the Bluetooth streaming.
That's fantastic.
And more subtle accommodations. I've shifted my teaching online because I don't need any accommodations online, and a lot of professors are hesitant about online education. It's changing over time, but to me, it is really critical for access for people with hearing loss, for people with other disabilities, working parents with young children, right? It just creates so much access that isn't there otherwise. And increasingly, I'm trying to do my committee work via Zoom and Teams also, again, because I just hear so much better that way.
For sure. Oh, this is great. Thank you.
Yeah, this was fantastic. That's a loaded question, and we appreciate everything. It's so
You got a loaded response.
that was great. It's really important for people, the way you described it so well, to see the evolution of hearing assistive technology and the accommodations and modifications over your time as someone with hearing loss. So, speaking of hearing loss, we always are curious how people self-identify. What terms do you use? So Brad uses hard of hearing, and I use hearing impaired, which I know is not as common now, but that's what I've had since 1977, so I'm sticking with it. So what terms do you use for yourself?
I've used both of those terms. These days, I tend to identify myself as either deaf or deafened with cochlear implants.
Oh, interesting.
And then I usually explain, I hear really well in quiet settings and one-on-one. However, as you add more people, you add more noise, then it's harder and harder for me to follow. So I discovered, so with hearing impaired, there are definitely people that find that term offensive. In my crude understanding is that it's seen as a couple of things. One, like when we talk about impaired, we're often talking about drinking and driving, right? And so some people don't like that. The other would be that it fits more with a medical model definition of disability. However, I know JAN, the Job Accommodation Network, they still use that term because some of the legal language is around hearing impaired.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
For hard of hearing, I prefer deaf because it seems to drive the point home more. When I say hard of hearing, there seems to be more of an assumption that if someone just yells at me loud
Oh,
enough,
that's true.
that it'll
Yep.
penetrate the hardness of my hearing, right? And so just, things I've learned over time, I don't really take offense to any terminology and try to listen to what other people like and use whatever term that they like. And I'm careful to differentiate between small D deaf and big D deaf.
Yeah.
Because audiologically, I'm as deaf as it gets, right? Implants off, I just hear nothing. But I was raised in a hearing environment. I know some ASL, but it's very crude, very simplistic, right? And make sure that people understand that people who are big D deaf, ASL isn't sign gestures, it's their language, right? And with that language comes culture and history that's really important.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons I used hard of hearing, because it's easier to say deaf, but you can't, when you're speaking, you can't differentiate between capitalization and the fact that I can hear a little bit.
Right.
I've been met with resistance if I've used that term, like, well, you can hear me, you're not deaf. So like for me, it's hard of hearing is just it fit me, and that it's so personal, right? How you describe yourself, and it's all over the place. So we just like to see what other people use, because there's no one way to be deaf or hard of hearing.
Well, and that's one advantage of DeafEnd, because DeafEnd explains like my history a little bit, and it causes people to pause about that difference between deaf and DeafEnd.
Right.
And mostly I'm looking to see how someone reacts. Some people don't want to know more, other people want to know more, and then I'll explain, whatever they want to know.
Interesting. That's fantastic. So do you self-identify in every situation?
So I self-identify in every situation where I think it's relevant.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So when I order my coffee, I don't feel compelled to explain. However, if I notice they're shouting out names and there are a lot of people and it's crowded, I can either make up some really unusual name that I know I'll pick out, or I'll just explain, I don't hear, you need to tell me, raise your hand when you want me to get my coffee.
That's great. I always hate those coffee shops that you have to give a name. Like, do I have to?
Yeah. So, and I'll share, at points early on, like most people, it was hard to embrace those identities. Like the first time I referred to myself as DeafEnd, it was like, wow, what did I just say? What does that mean? Right. At this point, I'm very proud of my identity, mostly because I've met so many amazing people like yourselves, right? So there's no shame or barrier in that sense, but there can be a sense of fatigue, right? Yeah. Does a coffee barista really need to know, right?
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. It's tiring, for sure. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm. What is one thing that you wish people knew about deaf and hard of hearing based on your experiences? If there's one thing that sticks out.
I don't know, you ask a professor for one thing, it's going to be a long one thing, right? Okay. So, part of what I'm writing about right now is really what we just talked about in terms of the diversity among people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So that difference between big D deaf, little d deaf, hard of hearing, whatever term we want to use. But then also when we talk about people that have moderate hearing loss, that loss could be high frequency, it could be low frequency, right? And so there's that element of diversity, and then there's avoiding that from becoming a master status, right? Sure. So knowing that someone has hearing loss is one really important thing to know about them, but there's everything else, right? All the other components of diversity. So that's something I'm trying to work on right now, is helping people understand that diversity and what that means for things like workplace accommodation, for career planning, and so forth.
That's great. Actually, that segues into our next question here. Is for very well done. For the people watching, what are some of the suggestions you have in regards to workplace accommodations? That can be self-disclosure, asking for the accommodations or modifications, or things like a 504 plan.
Yeah. So in interviewing a lot of people with hearing loss, it's really common for people to suffer for 5, 10, and more years before they really accept that they've changed biologically and they need to change their identity, how they see themselves, and be able to work with other people. So some different layers for that, getting really comfortable with what you can do and not do. And it's really important to have some things that you do really well, right? So work isn't about what you can't do, it's about what you can do. However, people with hearing loss sometimes need to do things differently. And that can be changing the nature of a job a little bit. So someone else at work does all the phone work, and I do all the email work or the online teaching in my case, right? So those are things that are kind of what I call job and career crafting. The longer game of career crafting was me leaving like regular business and joining academia, because I thought I'd be more successful in that domain. So I think it's important to do those things first so that most of your time is focused on the things that you do really well, and doing them in a way that works well with your hearing. Then around the edges, you can fill in with accommodations like Bluetooth streaming, like sign language interpretation, CART, and so forth. But focusing on your own comfort first is critical to asking for anything. Yeah. And then I think focusing, for me, it's always really important to focus on your expressing your skills and talents and your responsibilities to your employer. And then secondary would be accommodation. Okay. And that even plays into how I ask for things. So if I need something for the classroom, it's always with the leading in with, I want to do the best possible job that I can for my students. Right. Here's when I need to do the best possible job that I can for my students.
That's great. Yeah, the message matters, right? How you deliver.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. For sure. So I know that you're conducting a research project currently, and I was very happy to have had the opportunity to be part of that. Would you tell us a little bit more about the project, what you're working on, how folks can reach out if you're still looking for subjects and all that good stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I suppose can we put like my email address in the chat box or something for people to see? Okay. So sending me an email would be great. If you just Google David Baldridge at Oregon State, I will definitely pop up, and you can find me that way also. And I can't share a lot of details for it, but what we're doing broadly is we're interviewing people who have been impacted by hearing loss, people who are deaf and hard of hearing, like trying to get a full mixture. And we're trying to understand both their stories in terms of their hearing loss journey, as we did today, and also as we did today, understanding their workplace experiences. And of course, accommodations and technology play a big role for a lot of people, not everybody, but that's a really common theme too.
That's great.
Thank you. Perfect.
So what speaking engagements or appearances do you have coming up? Where can folks learn more about your engagements and your research?
Yeah, so two different answers for that. So my university website is a great place to find some existing presentations that are published there. as well as all the references for things that I have published. I often can't share the publication itself because once I publish it, I no longer own the intellectual property for it. So for upcoming speaking engagements, the main ones coming up are at the Academy of Management, which will be in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Fun.
So everyone is welcome to come, but I know it's a long ways to travel.
That's great.
That's fantastic. Will you be at the National Convention for HLAA in June?
I will. It's my first time there as a board member, so I won't be speaking.
Right.
I'm kind of conserving my energy this time. But a colleague, Jill Herbold, will be presenting on workplace accommodations and how people can ask for them. And she's representing HLA's task force on accessible, inclusive employment. Great. So folks will be at the convention, definitely say hello and stop in on Jill's workshop.
Super. All right. So we always like to wrap up with asking our guests for their book recommendations, because Brad and I are voracious readers, and we're always wanting to remind everyone that we're more than just our hearing loss. So just a little add-on at the end of every show, we put out a book recommendation.
Yes.
So what do you have?
Sure.
What do you like? Talk about it.
So first of all, for context, as a professor, I mostly read journal articles, which most people don't read. So for the geeky people out there, definitely read my journal articles. I've also written a few pieces for Hearing Life magazine is the current name for it. Yeah, that are meant to be more applied, so to speak. So for books, I'll recommend the ones that I use for my MBA course. So I think when we talk about negotiating the workplace, asking for accommodation, crafting our jobs, the ADA is always there. You can always hire an attorney and hash things out. But once you go that route, things can become adversarial. And it's really difficult if the other party is worried about stuff, but they're not talking with you about it, right? Sure. So, for example, you have a job interview and the person's thinking, God, how could a deaf person do this job? They're not going to ask that. No. Because that creates a legal liability for them. Absolutely. So in a situation like that, you need to preempt it. You need to know what's on their mind and address those issues. So in that context, for my MBA negotiations course, I use a book called Bargaining for Advantage. And it is just everyday bargaining for everyday people. So the author is actually an attorney, but he's rooted it in research on influence persuasion. And so it has very basic things about how you go about preparing, how you go about anticipating what's in your boss's mind when you ask for accommodation. What are they thinking about? What are they worried about? And the other book is the psychological foundation for that book. And that book is called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And it has more of the base psychology research underlying that approach to negotiation.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I'll definitely be picking those up myself. That seems like it might come in handy in some special education parent meetings.
I bet.
Yes, quite possibly.
As a teacher. So you want me to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next.
What do you got?
So I have The Pinball Effect. And so it's by an author named James Burke, and it's basically the butterfly effect for technology. And so one of the examples here is this book, for instance, owes its existence to the German jeweler Johannes Gutenberg getting the date wrong one day in the 15th century. So it's a fact. I read this in college 20 years ago, and it's great to see how things relate, even if you don't expect them to. So for anyone who doesn't know what the butterfly effect is, it's a butterfly flaps its wings in the Pacific, and chaos theory says that there's an earthquake in Lima or something, right? So everything's related. And so this is less catastrophic than the butterfly effect, But it's fascinating to see
Yeah.
how tangent technologies can relate and change the game. So that was cool. What do you got? Lighten it up for us.
Totally different
Lighten
direction.
it up.
And I went with a novel. You two are way too smart for me. So I just finished it this morning. It's called Wild Dark Shore, and it's by Charlotte McConaghy. It's a little dystopian. So it's this family that's living on an island off of Australia, and they're responsible for seed vaults because the world is falling apart ecologically, and they're storing all of the seeds, and they have to make decisions about the seeds, and then a mysterious person washes up to shore. So it's really kind of suspenseful, kind of figuring out who this person is, how do they fit in, how is everyone managing those personalities on the island, and the ending was fantastic.
Good.
So
I did note that you began that with lightening things up.
So you can tell this is unscripted. Usually when I go serious, she can kind of lighten it up, but apparently I misspoke. So
well, it was good.
Yeah,
I
good.
highly recommend it. So, David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was fantastic to see you again, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Brad will be at the conference in June. I will be teaching the children here in Massachusetts, but
I'll stop by.
Be sure to stop by and say hi, for sure.
Well, great. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you, Brad. So I won't see you, Julie. Another Engage, I hope. And thank you both for having me and for the great work that you're doing.
Thank
You're changing lives for sure.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Good to see you. We'll be in touch again.
All right.
Take care, David.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.